Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Eric Schurter with Corteva Agriscience. Usually when I talk to growers, I'm wearing my Corteva Agriscience shirt talking about varied subjects that we as Corteva sell. But today I'm coming to you from the Story County Farm Resistance Network. That's a group of individuals, farmers, retailers, industry, and Iowa State University who have all come together in a partnership to really promote good, sound resistance management when it comes to weed control. Now today we're at the Iowa State University Fields Lab. Mr. Warren Peterson did a great job of really setting up these demos, so we'd like to thank him here today for all the hard work he's done. One of the things that we at the Resistance Network are really promoting is trying to understand your weed problems, develop solutions to manage resistance. One of the things that we have developed is a field scorecard. As you look out here today, we have a ton of grass pressure, a lot of those problem weeds that each of you all face each and every year. But here in a couple months, you're going to be going through the combining yields in your soybean fields. And one of the things we're really encouraging farmers to do is use that scorecard. So as you're from the cab seat and you're going through, start taking notes on where in that field you're having problems in weed control. And that's what that scorecard is meant. It's just a tool for you as a farmer to really understand how your program worked this year, to work with your retailer, extension agent, other industry professionals that you trust to really develop that weed control program for the upcoming season. Here in a minute, we're going to start walking through several of the treatments and talk about some of the core principles around sound weed resistance management.
2020 is an interesting year because it's almost the opposite of 2019 in that we're concerned about late flushes of weeds. A lot of times rain is the main indicator whether you're going to get a late flush. So in 2020 we didn't experience a lot of late flushes. It was mainly just getting that initial kill post-application. Going into next year, we're going to want to make sure that if we do get rain in June, that we've got a residual herbicide there that'll carry us through to the end of the season. That's something we're noticing out here today, is that anything post worked great to kill, but then there's a second flush of weeds that is starting to come. We don't know if they're going to break canopy or not before we get to harvest. This demonstration site out here is evidence that we need to have a complete program. We need to look at the entire year. We need to have those residuals on early, and then we need to make sure we're very concerned with weed size when we go post to spray.
Today throughout the demonstration, we're going to be talking about the concepts and the various various treatments out here. We're not here to promote a given brand name or a given product. That's not our intent. Today we have used many of our products that you use in your farming operations to really highlight some of the principles around good weed control management. Now for many of you who are watching here today, you've been farming 20, 30, maybe 40 plus years. You remember the days where we relied heavily on our pre-emerge products to really carry us through the season. Now with the advent of some of our herbicide trait technologies, we started to move away from our foundation pre products. Behind me is an example of what it might look like when we do an early pre-plant burn down application with a group 2 and group 14. Many of the industry folks out there, we sell a pre-emerge product that has a combination of those two modes of action. But when we start to think about economics, that's where sometimes weed control may go awry. This is what a half rate would typically look with a group 2 and a group 14. Now as you look out throughout this plot, you'll start to see a ton of grass pressure starting to break, and when you start digging in the canopy, you'll start to see some of our broadleaf escapes. Now depending on when you get that foundation chemistry out there in the season, that will dictate when we need to start thinking about our in-season applications. Now obviously many of you are not going to do a half rate program, but when we think back through time, that was all we could do about 10 years ago, was to do a half rate. That's what we were willing to pay. Well, what does that develop? Well, that's led us to where we're at today, where we're using full rate programs and more expensive post programs still to try to get effective weed control. This will emulate what it would look like in a dry spring or an excessively wet spring. So when we get into those types of situations, and if we don't have our rates quite where we need to be, those are the fields that we really need to kind of pay close attention to and be ready to pull the trigger in season to maintain effective weed control. And our third treatment we're looking at here, folks, this is still that same pre-emerge product, but we're now using it at a higher use rate, more towards the top end of that use rate. And every product that you use in the industry has a wide rate range. That's why it's very important to understand what you're trying to achieve in your cultural practices, your spray program, and working with those trusted advisors to really dial in that rate. When we up our rate to more typical use rates, as you look out across that crop canopy, you can still see we have some grass escapes. We have not had a post product put out here yet, but you can see the big difference between a half rate and a full rate. Now again, each year is very different. When we start to elevate our pre-emerge rates, that does a lot of things for us. One, it starts to make sure that we have effective modes of action out there at rates high enough to delay resistance. Secondly, it buys you more time. When you have a half rate and we have a wet spring or a dry spring and those pre start to break, by having a higher use rate out there, you're buying yourself more time to try to manage that field. And as we continue to grow all our operations, time management is one of the key concerns that each of you have. Towards the full in use rate is where we'd like to see most growers be at to really delay the onset of that resistance, especially in a program approach. In our fourth treatment here today, we're going to kind of take a step back in time. Many of you, when we first started out with glyphosate, we started to do total post programs. And that is what this scenario really represents. No residual in our pre-program, no residual in our post. Now, when you look out there from the road, as we all do when we're driving 55 miles an hour, you'd say this is a pretty good, clean soybean field. But once you really start to dig out there, you can see the benefits that having a residual in season would have brought you. If I would take you out and start to dig in these soybeans, what you'll see is we have new grass coming on, some of our key broadleaves coming on, and here in 3 or 4 weeks, what you'll see is this is a weedy mess. Something at that stage, we really don't have any tools in our toolbox to really go fight because of the growth stage. Now, what's that doing? Well, when we only use a total post program, we're really selecting for that population, specifically for that mode of action that develops resistance. That's how we developed a lot of the resistance we're all faced with today, by not switching up our modes of action. Especially in a total post program, that's a huge concern that you all should always be concerned with, especially with our new technologies that we have out today. For those of you who have tried the Extend system or the Enlist system or the Liberty, those systems are still functional. If we abuse those herbicide tolerant systems like we did with glyphosate, we too will see problems down the road. It is inevitable. It's how we manage this to delay the potential for resistance. And that's why we're here today. So here we're at treatment 5, and this is probably where a majority of you who are watching here today will find yourselves. That is a good foundation product that is near or at full rates, plus an in-season post application. Very typical of Midwest soybean production. Now what we're doing with this type of approach is we're introducing multiple modes of actions to those weeds. So obviously if we do have weed escapes, we're not exposing them to the same mode of action again in season. And what you'll see as you look out here, we really started to clean up a lot of the weeds that we're all plagued with here in central Iowa. Now the benefit of a pre-post program is just that. It gives you time and multiple modes of action. When you look at resistance management, it is all about that. If we can get multiple modes of actions, pre and post, we will delay the onset of resistance. Now we also have the opportunity to throw additional tank mix partners in there to get 2 or maybe even 3 effective modes of action in that in season. In this particular example, we just did 1, just to represent the overall program, but I think most of you all can see where I'm going with this. In our last treatment here today, and as you look out across this soybean plot, and as you can see the untreated behind me, you're really at the stage where we in the industry, and I think retail and the university, and many of you are currently doing. And that is multiple modes of action down at effective pre at the right rates. We're using an in-season post application, but we're also layering in an in-season residual. And that's going to buy us a lot of time, and it's a broad-based, effective weed control program. Now, I know when you start adding up the dollars and cents, it's going to be more expensive than some of the treatments we've talked about. But when you think about resistance management, and one of the key drive-home takeaways, once you develop resistance, there is no going back. What's that cost of developing resistance? For many of you, and myself included where we farm, we bought into the glyphosate, and we weren't thinking about what good foundation chemistry or in-season residuals brought, and we developed glyphosate resistance. We cannot afford to continue to repeat this cycle over and over and over. And as we go back through time, we can look at anything we've done wholeheartedly across broad-based acres, and what was the outcome? Unfortunately, it was resistance every time. Whether you're talking about the ALS chemistries of the 80s and 90s, glyphosate of the 90s and 2000s, we've got some new technologies in our toolbox today. But to use those effectively and preserve that technology for the long term, from a resistance management perspective, We've got to be able to adopt some of these in-season tools and programs to effectively manage weed control. If we do that long enough, what you probably will find, what many growers have found, is that we can maybe start to dial back certain things on certain fields. We don't need to treat every field exactly the same. We don't plant one soybean variety across every field you plant. We don't necessarily have to do the same thing from a herbicide management perspective.
This is case in point and hits close to home for me because we do have some seed corn where weed pressure is extremely high. You don't have a lot of options, so what we're looking at now is, well, we can put our pre's on and we get as good a control as we can get, but the weed seed bank is so large that now we're looking at a double post. So we'll go real early and then we'll come right back in another 10 or 12 days later. The other option then would be go early with a post application and row cultivate. Obviously that'd be worst case scenario, but those are what we're experiencing today to make sure that we get great weed control, we keep our weed seed bank down, and we stay clean season long.
Hopefully today, as we walk through these 6 treatments and kind of look at some of these core concepts, here with the Story County Farm Resistance Network, you can see where our mind's going. You can see what we're trying to promote, and that's good, sound weed control management for resistance. And if we do these sound principles, we believe, and I know many of you watching today believe as well, we can delay the onset resistance, but it will take a team and a focused effort. Thank you for joining in here today, everyone.